Everybody. Welcome to the OpenTimelineIO virtual town hall for 2023. Today we have actually Eric Reinecke from Netflix and I are going to present an overview of OTIO, status updates about things that are going on in our project, and then we're going to have guest speakers. Darby, then Chris are going to talk about a bunch of cool things happening in the larger OTIO community. And first, we wanted to start off by giving you an overview of OpenTimelineIO. In this forum, we have new folks who haven't really seen it that much before, so we want to make sure that everybody knows what is OpenTimelineIO. So the way we like to talk about it is that filmmaking is a complicated process, and it involves the handoff between lots of different disciplines, lots of departments and collaborators throughout the process of making a film. And there's creative decisions that are made in editorial that need to be communicated quickly and clearly to everybody else in this process. Each discipline uses specialized tools, each of which focus on specific workflows for specific users. So it takes the cooperation of all these different things to make the film. OpenTimelineIO began as an effort to streamline the animation and visual effects filmmaking process. And visual effects studios tend to have software developers building a lot of custom pipeline tools. And so OTIO came about from a desire to make a robust and flexible and reusable tool set for these types of pipelines. We believe that these benefits can extend to all forms of filmmaking, even outside of visual effects and animation. And so OpenTimelineIO aims to facilitate communication and help streamline interchange between and within all the different parts of the filmmaking process. So no matter which of these boxes happen to be part of your workflow for making a film, we think that if there's editorial information that needs to be handed off, that OTIO can help facilitate that. Just as an example, what we see here is about 20 minutes from Toy Story 4. This is what the timeline looks like in Avid Media Composer. And every one of these video and audio tracks and all these thousands of clips, every splice and transition, these are built up over years of creative filmmaking decisions. And as the film is evolving and changing, all the producers, writers, artists of all types they're all working on the film, and they're all really hungry to know what's been changing in the cut of the film throughout that process. They want to know how these changes impact their work and what new media they need to give to editorial or get back from them to improve and work on the film. So OTIO is just trying to help communicate the complexity of this kind of timeline throughout a filmmaking pipeline. So that's kind of like the context in which OTIO is used, but what is OTIO actually? So it's a couple of different things. So it's called this because so one, it's an open source project. So it's a software development kit. It has some utility applications. It's freely available, and it's built on open source contribution. So that means that people from the industry, from all areas of filmmaking, can contribute to it. And we've had dozens of different people and organizations adding features and helping to make OTIO possible. It's about editorial timelines, so video clips, audio clips, tracks, all that kind of stuff, speed effects and markers, and carrying a lot of metadata through that's associated with each of those different objects. And it's also very much about interchange. So the I/O part is input and output. So we have a file format for carrying the stuff. There's import-export features in a lot of applications. And we also support a lot of file format conversion between other timeline formats that you may be aware of in the industry. So specifically, an OTIO file can hold a sort of unified data model that has these concepts like tracks and clips and transitions and markers. in it. So basically any of the things that you might see in an audio or video editing application can be represented in OTIO. So an OTIO file itself doesn't contain the actual media. It just contains the structure of the timeline, the durations of things, that sort of stuff. It contains references that point to where the media is. And those can be in basically any format in any location. We do also have the OTIO-Z and OTIO-D bundle formats that can take that OTIO and the associated media and wrap it together into one bundle. So this can be really helpful for delivery or archival purposes and making sure that nothing gets lost or unlinked. But that's optional, right? So you can use OTIO in either form. OTIO is also a software development kit. Its core is written in C++, and we have language bindings for Python, Swift, C, and Java, and others are possible as well. So regardless of what programming language your application happens to be in, software developers can use the language that they prefer to use OTIO and use it to add features in their application. OTIO also includes file format adapters to convert to and from a wide variety of other formats. And since adapters are plugins, it means that the system can be extended to support other formats that are used in the industry or custom ones that are specific to your application or your workflow. So we've used that to sort of like upgrade from a lot of old legacy formats that were custom to our pipeline at Pixar. And we're offering this format conversion plugin mechanism as a first-class part of OTIO to help avoid a lot of the pain points that come when anyone introduces a new format. And it means that OTIO can kind of coexist with other things in your pipeline during transition phases. When all of the applications in your pipeline can support OTIO, then you can be sure that the metadata is preserved, and then any sequence of handoffs between any of these applications can work smoothly. In this diagram here, we see a mixture of applications, some of which support OTIO natively, and others that require file format conversion. But you can use OTIO with all of these ones today. And we hope that there's more native support in the future. And you'll see some updates about that in a few minutes. We also provide some sample OTIO data sets. And having rich, interesting data available to test with it can be really, really helpful. So we've partnered with ASWF's Digital Production Example Library. They host production data sets that are used in filmmaking, from like 3D scenes and volumetric clouds and a bunch of cool things like that. And the example library uses a license that permits use for software testing and presentations and things like that, but also balances some restrictions that satisfy studio concerns that they have about releasing open content. So specifically, last year, Animal Logic contributed their A-Lab trailer as both an avid media composer project and as an OTIO-Z bundle. So you can see a little sort of taste of what that is here. So thank you for Animal Logic for making that available. And new coming really, really soon, AWS is releasing the source media and timeline for their short film called Pichu. And Pichu was edited in DaVinci Resolve. So they're releasing the Resolve project as well as OTIO-Z bundle with the media and timelines and everything. And that should be released in the coming weeks. They're aiming for releasing that before SIGGRAPH. And thank you so much to AWS for making this available. If you want to find out more about that, you can go to the dpel.aswf.io website, and you can see everything else that they have there and download many of these. We've also seen studio adoption happening. So OTIO is already in use in a bunch of different studios, both large and small. If you want to see a sort of detailed presentation about what that transition was like, last year, SIGGRAPH Animal Logic presented about their transition, and so I believe you can go and find the recording of that. We know that Disney Feature Animation is in the process of doing a similar transition right now, and so we hope to hear about that in the coming months. We've also seen a lot of vendor adoption for OTIO. Last year, we co-presented with Autodesk and Foundry and F-Track about OTIO support in their applications. It's also available in Blender and Matchbox and Cezanne and a bunch of different things like that. New that's just been released, we're excited that Blackmagic Designs DaVinci Resolve, version 18.5 that just came out, has added actually both OpenTimelineIO and USD support. So, universal scene description is like 3D format that's also open source. And we're really excited to see both of these landing in DaVinci Resolve. So thank you so much, Blackmagic, for doing that. And you'll see a little bit more about that a little bit later as well. We're also seeing a lot of community participation. So both Adobe and Autodesk now have representatives on our steering committee. Hi, Jeff and Roger. Thank you guys for joining us. And Avid has been regularly coming to some of our meetings, which is great. So it's good to have this sort of open discussion about use cases, about how OTIO is used in the industry and the directions that we want to go. So OTIO is a community project, so please come participate in the community. You can come to, we have bi-weekly steering committee meetings, which usually have about 15-20 people talking about OTIO and what's going on. We have a GitHub discussion forum that you can ask questions on. It's a great place to sort of find things out. And there's quite a presence on our OpenTimelineIO Slack channel, which is hosted under the ASWF, and you can find lots of more about that on the OpenTimeline.io website. Now I'm going to take a drink of water, and then we're going to talk about some 2023 updates. Specifically, we're going to talk about we're sort of reorganizing how our adapter plugins are built and deployed. But we're going to talk about file format versioning, sort of forwards and backwards compatibility. We're going to talk about a new viewer application for looking at the timeline structure, and a command line utility for working with OTIO. After that, we're going to have our guest speakers. So for right now, I'm going to hand it off to Eric to talk about adapters and file formats. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Josh. So in the next release of OTIO, which is beta 16, the OpenTimelineIO PyPI package will only carry the OTIO core with OTIO JSON, OTIO Z, and OTIO D file format support. But don't worry, we're not leaving the adapters behind. The new OpenTimelineIO-plugins PyPI package will give you OpenTimelineIO core along with all the adapter plugins you're used to. Next slide, please. We made OpenTimelineIO useful from day one by providing adapters for common editorial formats out of the box. But over time, the community is really engaged, and contributors with expertise in those specific formats started driving in the direction of and creating new adapters. In turn, the OpenTimelineIO steering team has focused a lot more on the core OTIO schema and SDK. This reorganization will allow us to turn the ownership over to the community experts that have really been maintaining those adapters so they can get improvements out to the community as soon as they're ready. The core library can then orient versioning around the schema and SDK independent of adapter enhancements. We think that this setup better reflects how the project has actually been operating for quite some time. Next slide, please. Over the past year, we've spun each of these adapters into its own GitHub repo under the OpenTimelineIO GitHub organization and created corresponding PyPI packages. A huge shout out to the broader OTIO community for swarming on this problem and getting it all taken care of. There was a lot of work in there, and people donate a lot of time to make that happen. The new repos are still part of the OpenTimelineIO project, and the core team still supports them. However, over time, we expect the community members that know the most about each format will take the lead in driving reviews and releases, so the core team is less in the way and enhancements can go out to you all a lot more quickly. Slide, please. This new arrangement also allows for more flexibility in how users pick and choose their adapter combination. In the simplest form, when Beta 16 comes out, you can just switch from installing OpenTimelineIO to installing OpenTimelineIO-plugins with pip, and you'll get the full adapter set from PyPI. However, over the years, we've found that people have internal customized forks of certain adapters they use. The new setup allows the option to install the public version of OpenTimelineIO and then selectively choose the adapter plugins you want from PyPI or even an internal source. Next slide, please. Note that if you're relying on the currently included adapters and don't pin your version, this change might break your setup. In preparation, you should pin the current OTIO version, and then after the Beta 16 release, you can switch to the OpenTimelineIO-plugins PyPI package. Slide. You can find more info in GitHub issue 1386. We'll also be pushing a preview release of this new scheme soon, so people can test it in their pipeline and give us any feedback they have. And we'd really love to hear from you and see how well this works when you actually use it in your environments. Next slide. So now I'm going to switch gears and we're going to talk a little bit about the new file format versioning system. Since the first public releases, OpenTimelineIO has had a schema versioning system, allowing individual schema objects to evolve and define rules to migrate older schema versions to the latest one seamlessly on file read. Over the years, we've enhanced marker, clip, and even renamed an old schema sequence to be called track. These transitions were handled transparently with our forward compatibility system. Next slide. This has been really great if you're sure that the OTIO SDK versions and applications only get newer as an OTIO file moves down the pipeline. But as OTIO is integrated in more and more applications that have their own release cadences, this impedance match will be harder to manage. We wanted there to be a way to easily choose which OTIO file version works best for you independently the SDK version in your applications. So next slide, please. To make this possible, we've introduced a schema downgrade system that can be used to save time. It allows you to specify any schema version equal to or less than the ones in the SDK version that's being used. And the schema versions are specified on a per object type basis, like clip 1 and clip 2. And then schema version sets let you bundle a collection of individual object schema versions into a grouping that, for instance, matches the OTIO release version, like 0.15.0. Next slide, please. So while schema version sets sort of out of the box have this way of giving you the OTIO version of an entire file, there's actually a few different ways you can use it. For instance, you might have an internal-only schema version that you want to combine with OTIO SDK schema versions to set up your pipeline's ideal schema combo. You interact with version sets in a few core ways. The C++ core comes with schema sets corresponding to the SDK version where the combo first appears. We expect these to be the most used ones. Python users can use plugin manifests to define a proprietary schema set for use in their pipeline. This is useful if you have custom schema plugins that you've defined and you're using throughout. And then finally, the JSON serializer allows you to provide a schema set when you're writing your OpenTimelineIO JSON. Next slide, please. For example, we see here how to specify the schema set to use when writing out files in Python, C++, or in a shell using the OTIO tool. This would write a file that, these examples would write a file that's compatible with users of OTIO 0.15.0 or newer. We hope application integrators will adopt this feature to provide the best interoperability for their users. And that's schema versioning in OTIO. I'll pass it back to Josh now to talk about Raven.
Great, thanks, Eric. So next we want to talk about a new application that we've developed for viewing and inspecting OTIO timelines. This utility we're calling Raven, and you can use it to open an OTIO file and display the structure of all the timeline and tracks and clips inside of it. You can also click on any of the clips to inspect the details over on the right side, including custom metadata that's in there. Here we see an entire feature film loaded into Raven, and you can see it loaded in just a few seconds, and it's nice and responsive and fast. You can see all the clips and all the tracks and everything on there. This was a frustration we had with our older tool called OTIO Review that was not performant in a case like this. This is also one of the reasons the way we made this was we wanted to be able to zoom in down to the frame level. So here you can see a timeline with a mixture of video rates, and I've zoomed in so you can see the stripes are individual frames. And this ability to intermix things at different rates, even from clip to clip on the same track, is a feature that OTIO allows that most other systems don't. And we want to be able to have a clear visualization of how that works, what the use cases for that may be. And so Raven is working as a sort of test bed for that. So Raven aims to replace our older OTIO view utility. The old one was written in Python and Qt, and we were frustrated by some slow performance and issues that it had. So we've rewritten it in C and C++. We're using a GUI toolkit called Dear ImGUI that's been kind of fun to use and is working well for us. We also have some features for sort of fiddling and like editing with things. It's not meant to be an editing application, but you can, for example, vary like a time warp or the duration of a clip or something as a way to help understand how OTIO works. And to clarify, Raven's not a video editing program, and it's not a playback program. You can't see the media. If you want to play things back, you should use OpenRV or TL Render or CineSync Play or any number of other applications that can open OTIO files for actually watching the video content in there. Next, we also want to talk about OTIO which is a command line utility we introduced last year. It's kind of a general purpose utility for doing some common operations on playlists. It can sort of combines a bunch of different things together, including the file format conversion, doing filtering, combining, flattening things, and inspecting things. So let's look at a couple of examples of what it can do. Here's one that comes up fairly often where, say, I have 3 OTIO files and I want to join them together, sort of spliced end to end into one longer OTIO. So I can say OTIO tool and give it input those 3 files, tell it to concatenate them, and tell it to output one that's stitched together. Similarly, I can take 2 inputs and stack them on top of each other. So if I had 3 video tracks in one and 4 video tracks in another, they would be overlaid on top of each other with the stack operation. Here's an inspection example where we're looking at the A-Lab trailer that we showed earlier. And we can see here in Raven, we can see it has 1 video track and 6 audio tracks. And on the command line, we can see something similar. We can ask OTIO tool to read that OTIO, look at just audio tracks, list them out, and list all the clips as well. So you can see the names of the tracks and the clips as text there. Another feature is to verify that OTIO can access the media for those things. So in this example, I removed 2 of the movies to make it complain that 2 of the pieces of media were not found. That's only looking at local files. If they were over HTTP or some other mechanism, the command line tool is not smart enough to go reach out and find those, but perhaps it could be extended to do that in the future. Here's another example of flattening things. So this comes up quite often because a lot of tools outside of the editorial space can really only deal with one video track. And so here I've taken the P2 example that we looked at earlier. It has a couple of different video tracks, and I've told OTIO tool to read that in. I'm actually implicitly converting it from AAF to OTIO here as well. I've told it to flatten just the video tracks and leave the audio alone, and output that again. And so you can see the bottom example there is afterwards, those video tracks have been collapsed together, but the audio tracks are left as is. So OTIO tool can do a lot of different things, and the aim here is that if there's some repetitive, non-creative tasks that are happening with your timeline over and over again in your workflow, that OTIO tool can help to automate that through some simple scripting. And obviously more complicated workflows can be automated as well using OTIO's Python SDK. And actually the code for OTIO tool was written with each of these features sort of as one little simple function that could be reused and copy pasted into other applications. So it's meant to be kind of sample code for understanding how a Python programmer could achieve some of these operations as well. All right, that's it for our updates. Next, we're going to ask our guest speakers to tell us what they've been up to in the broader OTIO community. And first, I'm going to hand it off to Ben Schofield, who's going to tell us about OTIO context for creatives and use cases in production roadmaps. Ben, go ahead and unmute and take it away.
Sorry, can I? Oh, yes, share screen. Thank you. Right. So yeah, and what I'm talking about here is a lot of the focus of these groups is around the engineering and making sure this stuff is technically elegant. But I think there's another piece of this, which is how we make sure that it gets adopted and used externally. So really, that's what the thrust of this presentation is about, is how we set this in context for creative teams. And if you look at the ASWF Foundation website, you can see that all the projects there are ranked. They're ranked by soft maturity. But if you're a creative person looking at that, which one of these shouldn't you use? Are they relevant to you? It's difficult to see because it's very much looked at from the kind of engineering progression. And if you look at the, I've been camping on this group, and thank you very much, Eric and Josh, for letting me sit there and listen. I wouldn't say I've made a huge contribution to the Python wheels, but when I look through the documentation, you can see there's a very small number of use cases. But if you look at the group, it's quite a wide group, and there are signs of kind of wider adoption that this is being used in a number of different places. So also, as Josh has said, it's being used on a lot of different product roadmaps that people are starting to work out that they need to engage with OpenTimeline and other ASWF projects to make sure you can federate these solutions successfully. So the real question is, how do we accelerate this? How do we take it out of that engineering function and make sure that business people and creative teams start to look at it? And when you look at the context for creatives, most creatives will, whether you're making a feature, making TV, whether you're making an advert, you've got this idea of a kind of a life cycle of content, which starts in the planning phase and moves through production, then into post, and then into distribution. So across that, and I've got a couple of examples here from AWS and Unreal, but everyone has a similar sort of chart. So people are used to looking at these and saying, this is the life cycle of my content, and this is the part of the map that I live in. And so what we need to do, I think, is break out those creative tool sets, break out those common workflows, and then try and identify within those where there are problems that need to be solved that OpenTimeline helps to solve. And once you can identify those problems, the other thing I think it's really important to do is quantify the business value, because although you can have something that's really technically elegant, unless there's a business reason for doing it, you'll never get peak creatives to pay attention. Because if the answer, and everyone's been burnt by technology in the creative world, you know, it ends up being more expensive and slower than doing the old way. So you've got to make sure that when we're doing this, that there is an actual benefit for doing it, and then creative teams will start to adopt. So those use cases, if you look at them, are really quite simple, and it's really, you know, trying to focus on how you synchronize teams across different parallel tasks. So this has come out of some really big, complex workflows in companies that have found these problems early, but it applies to companies, I think, of any scale. That if you're trying to coordinate across these tasks, how do you make sure that people's versioning isn't out of step? And the other thing is, how do you make sure that when people do approve and lock a version and go through that review process, that they're looking at the right thing, and when it comes back in, it has the right context. So, but it's reaching out to this community and getting them to contribute their innovations using the tools to make sure that everyone can start to share that. So here's a very simple view, which is, you know, again, mimicking that life cycle, starting with the planning phase, production, distribution. And I've overlapped production distribution because a lot of the stuff that goes around with mastering, with the localization, is a repeat of the post-production process. You're using the same tools. And then obviously when you get to the end of that process, you're doing consumption. And in talking to the wider community in some of these events, we've seen feedback right down from the kind of the end of the distribution chain, where people are doing things, and they're saying that they've got time-dependent processes. What they want to start doing is using OpenTimeline right outside of that very tight visual effects, the animation to editorial kind of piece, which was this genesis. And here's an example. This is just me browsing through the Slack channel, and you can see there's a conversation going on, and I kind of took that conversation coming out of the Slack channel, which was going backwards and forwards, to a real problem, and created a use case. And so here's a use case around losing metadata and why you need to move beyond AAF and start using OpenTimeline. And it involves products that then also, as Josh has said, they're starting to build this in the roadmap. So I think this is what we need to do is build up a portfolio of use cases, and then also have a set of check marks against the different product roadmaps to say, this is when you can start to bring these products together. And I think that when you look at product families, they'll tend to have their own internal mechanism. But when you federate solutions and try and work out externally, that's when you need to be able to have these connectors understand how you map onto these open projects. So here's an example. This is a pretty simple one. It's this is Netflix. So and what I've kind of outlined here is, I think if you're trying to get people to immediately grasp something pretty simple, it's, you know, who are you? What's the problem? How OTIO fixes it, and what it saves. And to be honest, in my experience, has been the most difficult thing to do has been to get engineers to say, to commit to saying, oh, it actually saves me this many days or this much money. But I can, from my experience, unless you get something that calls that out and makes it a rough calculation of what it's going to save in effort, then you're not going to get anyone to really start to apply it. So I think this is early days, but if we can get some recognizable brand names, and we can get some of these examples crystallized into a small piece, it will resonate with people. People will think that it's in their area, it's the sort of stuff they do day to day, and that, or if a large company like Pixar or Netflix are doing it, they should be, it's worth paying attention to. So thank you, Eric. Here's some examples. Now, we, having said we need to have a good brand association, we didn't quite clear this in time. So, but at some point you'll have a good brand logo associated with this. But essentially, this is about how Netflix uses the editorial process to drive animation tasks. So storyboards are created, and they are then composited into a little clip, an edit clip. And that is driven into ShotGrid, and then that associates with an animation, a task for an animation team who'll take this this mashup of different storyboards that have been edited into a timeline, and they'll do a piece of animation. And as you kind of iterate through this and round trip this back around, at the moment there are parts of this that are still AAF, but the idea is as you loop around this, then if you can have everything in OpenTimeline, then you have a much better exchange of metadata. So going back to those basic use cases, you can make sure that when the animation team have finished, if the editorial team have given them a moving target and they've taken something off the end or expanded it, the animation team are able to adjust their output so it's all together. And you could go back to you can do this in different ways organizationally. You could make editorial the center and have to go back to the editorial suite and re-render everything to look at it again. But by doing it this way, you can make sure that you can keep people in sync without having to drag them back to that central point to check on progress. Here's another example, which is again pretty simple, and this is another part of the chain. This is when marketing. So you've got a finalized master, and marketing want to now create trailers, and this is an issue of finding the right content and then getting it out in the right resolution. So you'll have your IMF master library, but these are massive files for the highest quality rendition. So what Netflix have done is created a cloud encode service. So you've got a library then of that IMF library can be browsed as a set of proxies, and a Premiere user can browse and download that IMF proxy. They can do their edit, create a timeline, and then the association of that OpenTimeline file plus the ID can go back into the cloud encode service, and then that automates the picking up of the high quality IMF master file. And just like you would for distribution, you can create a trailer. So again, this is taking out some of that friction where normally you'd have to request an IMF master, transcode it on the fly, and then work on it, and then push it back in, and then upload the project, download the big file, and do a conform. So this is how OpenTimeline is really becoming the metadata glue for an automated process. So there's two examples from Netflix. I think this is now looking at, again, thanks to Josh, this is the Pixar kind of content lifecycle. So you're starting all the way from that planning phase up in development with a script and going all the way out to that final film. And I think this is important because it brings in the aspect that it isn't just one of these tools that Pixar are using, that they're using a combination of tools. So in OpenTimeline is very important for that 2D edit, but it also ties in with USD. So this concept of having kind of time, space, and color being the fundamental things we've got to get right in the process. But hopefully over time, what we can do is capture more of these kind of workflows, and then people can share what they do in different parts of the forest, and it will resonate with different parts of the creative community. And also from a product person's point of view, if they can see that Pixar are using certain tools in certain ways, then the great thing about having these open source ways of exchanging information is that it means that someone in an organization who has the freedom to go and choose a different tool can then take responsibility for exchange that information. They can go and pick up that tool and use it to exchange data. And I think, Eric has always said that's one of the key mantras in Netflix is the combination of freedom and responsibility. It's on you, but you can use it to, if you can choose what you have to do. So, I guess in conclusion, I think we've got some building blocks here. I've talked about time, space, and color, and I think OpenTimeline is starting to coalesce as being the way that you exchange and pieces of content in a timeline. And there are other efforts. There are different pieces of the industry where these things are going to be taking place. As long as we can map to those, I think OpenTimeline has had enough different use cases through it, has had enough people looking at it that it's able to support most of the things that people want to do. And in combination with the OpenColor and EXR, in combination with USD, I think this is the kind of fundamental building blocks. But again, what we're looking at here is that technical elegance. Here is the right solution technically that the community have agreed with. But unless you've got the business value unless you've got a combination of technical evidence and business value, you're never going to drive creative adoption, because creative people are inherently conservative. They have a delivery to make. They know what works. They're not going to step outside of that unless they can see there's a reason for doing it. They can take some of the friction out, recover some time, do it cheaper, use a different tool set without maintaining custom connectors, and then you'll get creative adoption. So really what we're trying to do here is to collate the use cases in the standard template. So I've spoken about this in different birds of a feather groups at HPA. I've sat in on kind of the vendor groups at IBC at NAB, and I'm sure there'll be another one at this IBC coming up. But I think this is of interest to users in the community and to product teams. But we have to make sure that in doing this, when we have the discussions, we extract and quantify that business value, and then test it out so that people can stand up here on this forum, not just me talking about it, but we get real productions saying why they've been able to do this. There are other interactions with the ASWF ecosystem. So I think expanding on that content lifecycle and saying where do these pieces link together, I think is important. And then looking at other initiatives. So I also work on the OSVP group, which is about getting camera metadata from that. When Josh had hit the start of the cycle, which is that onset capture, is making sure you get fidelity of metadata coming through frame by frame all the way through. USD is about the stage and the prims, about how you manage your 3D models, but primarily consumption today is 2D, and it's how you bring those 3D worlds synchronize them into the 2D world. And then IMF is like DCP. It's the way that stuff is mastered goes out. So what I would encourage is anyone on this call who's got an example in the wild, just please get in touch. And if I can turn that into a single slide, we can start adding this into the library. Jeff Hodges is working on launching the new website, and there'll be a lot more information there. But I think this will help people who may not be as technical as the group that currently are in that community. It may help them decide to put their toe in the water to try it out on their tools. And what we'll do is we'll advance that creative endeavor, because at the end of the day, I don't think Pixar, Lucasfilm, Netflix would be putting the efforts they put into this if it wasn't helping the creative process move forward. So that was it for me. I don't know if probably we should do questions and answers at the end.
Yeah, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. Thank you so much, Ben. That was awesome. And I think we could definitely use a little help sort of translating all of our techno jargon into something that makes sense in the context of the sort of creative life cycle. And so we appreciate that effort quite a lot. Next, I want to invite Chris from MovieLabs to give us an overview of the project they're doing that's a collaboration between OpenAsset.io and OpenTimelineIO and MovieLabs. Take it away, Chris.
Yep. Let me share my screen here. Okay, let me go. Okay, can you see my screen? Perfect. Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Chris Vienneau, and I'm today representing MovieLabs. So for those of you that don't know, MovieLabs is a studio technology joint venture with a lot of the major studios, and it gets a lot of the problems and issues that the studios want to work on in common. And the one initiative that I don't know if you've had a chance to check out, but I highly encourage you to check it out if you haven't yet already, is the 2030 vision for content production. It's based on a series of principles. So here we have the 10 principles that are, again, this was developed with the studios. A lot of the major vendors, Pixar was one of the members of this joint venture. And here, if you look at the various principles that we want to be able to bring into the next way that we do production, the genesis of the project that we're talking about today, and I'll only go into kind of a sneak peek in it because we have the presentation at the Academy Software Foundation, which we'll go into more detail. But we were really looking for a sandbox proof of concept that we could illustrate or try out many of the principles and also try out a lot of the technology that is being developed as part of this 2030 vision. The ontology for media creation is one of the key things, which again, I encourage you to check out at the MovieLabs website. But here, again, some key principles like all assets go straight to the cloud. That's a key principle that we want to have in the future of production. Distribution is a publish function where we want, instead of moving data around, we want that it all to be about permissions. A new system define and link media assets. So again, when we talk about, we want to be able to have systems where assets stay in the same place and everything is ID driven, and we can find media wherever it is throughout the cloud, either that's, you know, a hybrid cloud or public cloud. Number 9, super key for this presentation as well, right? Workflows are built upon standard building blocks and industry APIs. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to build out some sample workflows with the industry building blocks provided by ASWF, so that we could illustrate, hey, can we move some of this information around in open formats? And then number 10, when we get to the OpenRV, that we want this to be a real-time function. So again, you know, we're towards the end of the call. We want to make sure that we leave a good amount of time for questions. So we will be having a full presentation at the open source days. So we'll be talking about, you know, how we used OpenAssetIO, OpenTimelineIO, and OpenRV to be able to do a given workflow in the MovieLabs 2030 vision. But to give you kind of a sneak peek, you know, again, for those of you, this is very common. Editorial turnover today, you know, you're creating a new version, you know, whether Premiere or Blackmagic or Avid, you upload a media to today, you know, SaaS-based review is very common, Moxion Frame.io. Then that makes another copy of the media. The media oftentimes is reviewed, but in a lot of times in the VFX workflows, media is then downloaded and another copy is made. So in this workflow, there's several copies of the media made, causes issues with security, and again, also multiple copies of very important material flowing through. So what we're going to demonstrate, and again, what we were very happy to be able to work with an OpenTimelineIO is a 2030 vision proof of concept of this, where we'll be using Adobe Premiere, and we will using an automation framework called Helmet Effects. So it's a workflow manager on top of Adobe Premiere that allows us to, you know, control the export process, make sure that we do things like auto naming. The file naming is the same. We auto create, in this case, the AAF, upload it and convert it into an OTIO. We put all of the assets, we render the assets directly to the cloud and shared cloud storage. We then extract out the IDs that were in the OpenTimelineIO, and then we register those with our resolver, which we can then plug into OpenAssetIO, so that in the end, in OpenRV, and we'll demonstrate this, we can load up the OTIO, and instead of the media being locally, the media is on a shared cloud storage. We'll be demonstrating security where we can authenticate, you know, make sure that everyone's a good actor, and also authorize, based on policies, access to the URIs that are inside of the OTIO. So again, you know, we're very happy that, you know, that OpenTimelineIO has progressed over time, and that as we looked to kind of demonstrate some of these key principles of the 2030 vision for the studios, we chose to use OTIO to be the kind of the vessel to represent the timeline, so that we could, you know, bring that up into a shared location. Instead of creating new versions of the media, we just created a new version of the OpenTimelineIO that referenced the original media. And then now with the Open Review initiative, we were able to use OpenRV. We were able to kind of, you know, have access to the source code to embed some of the security principles. And then we were one of the first customers of OpenAssetIO, where we used OpenAssetIO to take, instead of paths, we took IDs that we had embedded in the file, and we used OpenAssetIO to go and discover where those where that media was, and then turn that into media that streams directly into OpenRV, and we get a review experience that's more in the line with the 2030 vision. So again, I didn't want to play all the videos and all that stuff, because again, we've been working hard on this, and I encourage everyone to come to the Open Asset Days, and sorry, the Open Academy Software Foundation Days, and see the demo live. And then, really quick before, again, we go, I really liked your demo. I could be using some of those tools right now. So we're building this, we're building this through the DCC integration in Premiere, and some of these, and some of the utilities. We're finding it hard to propagate metadata. I think, again, these are all things that people have talked about. These are sort of custom things that people do. It's not off the shelf. So again, hearing that there's a lot of people that want to be able to bring in open metadata into these DCC packages, get them out in this open formats, and propagate them through systems is something that MovieLabs is a very big advocate of. Because again, the future sort of media being ID based, and that can be propagating around, and that can work with asset management systems and production management systems. The future is something that we've been trying to prove with this project. So yeah, so we just wanted to come on today and give you a little sneak peek of something that we'll present in a couple of weeks, and say that we were everything that we tried to do relative to the 2030 vision, we were able to accomplish with OTIO. And I think, Ben, you did a great job saying, in terms of the ecosystem, that next step is a lot of these various vendors supporting this, so that that rich data can then flow into this format. Because again, I think the format is more than capable of handling the information that we wanted to build out. And so we're very happy to try this out and support the initiative.
So thank you so much, Chris. This is really exciting to see, and I look forward to seeing more at the Open Source Days presentation.
Thanks.
Great. Let's see. Okay, so thank you, Chris. That was fantastic. Our next guest speaker is Darby Johnston, who's going to tell us about TL render and CineSync Play. And Darby, so Darby's here to answer questions. I'm going to queue up the video, and let's try this out. Great.
In this presentation, I would like to show some of the new OpenTimelineIO features that we are working on for TL render and CineSync Play. At last year's Open Source Days, we announced the initial support for OpenTimelineIO, and over the past year have been busy working on adding new features. As a brief introduction, TL render is an open source library for building playback and review applications. CineSync Play is a free-to-download desktop application for media playback and review. The first new feature is the timeline user interface, which allows you to inspect the structure of the OpenTimelineIO file with the individual tracks and clips and their associated image thumbnails and audio waveforms. You can zoom into the timeline to inspect the individual frames. You can pan the timeline. Notice as we're panning the timeline, the thumbnails are loaded automatically to help conserve memory and improve performance. You can change the size of the thumbnails to make them larger to see the images better, or smaller to see more of the timeline. The next feature is support for OTIO-Z. OTIO-Z files are a specialized form of OpenTimelineIO files that bundle the OTIO file and its associated media into a single zip file. This makes it convenient for both delivery and archiving. To work with OTIO-Z files, you can simply unzip them and then open the OTIO file. But what if instead of unzipping the OTIO-Z file, you could save both time and disk space by reading it directly? We have implemented this through the use of memory mapping. We memory map the OTIO file and get pointers to the media from inspecting the zip header. We then pass these memory pointers to the I/O system for reading the media. This allows instantaneous opening of OTIO files. The last feature is support for playback of USD files. This is somewhat experimental, but has been working surprisingly well, so we wanted to show it to get feedback and start discussions about possible use cases. USD, or Universal Scene Description, is a file format developed by Pixar for storing 3D scene information that has been gaining broad acceptance within the industry. This video shows a collection of USD files that were assembled into a sequence using an OpenTimelineIO file. Transitions were then added, as well as an additional video track to overlay the shot information. The frames from the USD files are rendered on the fly and then cached in memory for playback. For files that are heavier to render, you can use in and out points to select a range that is then cached into memory and can be played back in real time. The USD files work seamlessly with the other features within CineSync Play, so you can do things like color correction, annotations, and A/B comparison. Here I am wiping between the USD animation file and the final rendered movie. And playing them back side by side. The code for these features is currently in a development branch in the TLRender GitHub repository and will be merged back into the main branch next week. The features will be available to try out in upcoming versions of CineSync Play. Thanks to Animal Logic and the Blender Foundation for making the A-Lab and Spring content available for use. This presentation was created with open source software, including OpenTimelineIO, TLRender, OBS Studio, Inkscape, Audacity, and FFmpeg. Thanks for watching.
Right. Thank you, Darby. That was really, really cool to see. I'm going to switch back to our other slides here. Okay, great. Yeah, this is really, really fun to see. TLRender and CineSync coming along and getting lots of cool new features. Okay, great. I'm going to. Okay, we're a little bit over time, but we only have a little bit left, and we hope you stick around because we have a little bit of cool stuff. Okay. So we wanted to talk a little bit about feature directions for OTIO. We've shown this slide a couple of times before. It has new check marks on it, which is really exciting. So this is kind of a view into the features in OTIO and which applications support import and export of OTIO. And notably, we see that DaVinci Resolve has lots of new check marks on here by having the native support, which is really exciting. I think there's a couple of other ones. So we just saw CineSync Play with the bundled media. So I put a little check mark there. There might be a couple of other things missing over here. And I wanted to invite Jeff Hodges to say a couple words here as well.
Sure. So I can share today that the Adobe Premiere Pro team is currently work in progress on adding native support for OTIO import and export to Premiere Pro. Don't have an ETA to share at this time, but I can say the engineers are working on it. So we'll hopefully have more to share over the next couple of months. Very excited about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Adobe. We are hoping to get more and more check marks on this thing, which translate into really nice workflows for all of our users and more streamlined movie making happening out there. So if there's any part on here that you want to see to help move forward, or that you're a customer for, that you want to advocate for, please speak up and tell your vendors to get involved. It's good. It's finally happening, so it's really cool. The other thing that we wanted to highlight is we've seen a couple of examples of OTIO and USD in the same application. So we saw Resolve now supports both of those. We just saw Darby's presentation having OTIO bringing USD content into the viewport. And we just want to sort of highlight that, like, this has been a question over many years. Working on OTIO is sort of, what's the story about working together with USD? We both these projects have significant roots within Pixar. We do talk about this at Pixar, but we are actually super interested in talking about it with the community. And there's kind of like two sort of ways we see that this could work. One is we could implement a bunch of OTIO concepts and schemas within USD files. So you could have your tracks and clips and timing and stuff like that within a USD schema. Or we could do sort of the other way around, and we can have OTIO files that reference and sort of point to USD files the way that we point to media. And that's, I believe, the way that Darby just showed is working. That's something we've talked about sort of as a group. So that's kind of like the latter one you could kind of do today, and there's people experimenting with that. We've also seen other folks sort of thinking about that. We know that the Foundry is doing some experiments in that realm, and we're hoping to hear more about that. We know that Nuke Studio also supports both, and we're hoping to learn more about that too. So we've been trying to sort of gather the use cases and gather the interested parties to try to have a further discussion about this and how sort of decide how we want these two technologies to work well together in the future. So if you're interested in participating in that, please come chat with us, and especially if you have specific use cases. We have lots of hypothetical use cases, but if you have like real use cases where you really want to help drive this forward, we think that sort of having production driven milestones and goals is a super effective way of moving this type of thing forward. So if you want to get involved in that or anything related to OTIO, please come show up at our steering committee meetings. We have those every 2 weeks. They're open to the public. And we have our GitHub discussion forum, which is a great place to ask questions. If you're unsure about something, want some help with something. And the Slack channel as well has quite a lot of participation. Great. Okay. So with that, we are going to open it up to questions. We got this one here. Actually, I'm going to leave us on this slide here. But feel free to ask questions, and we can spend at least a few minutes talking with y'all about anything that you like. And thank you so much to our guest presenters. Thanks, Eric, for presenting along with me. And yeah, it's always a pleasure. So let's see. Do we have any questions already in the chat? Yeah. Okay. Okay, we got some thank yous. That's awesome. There.
Like it's a quiet group.
Mm-hmm. Let's stun silence. Let's see. How about let me ask Darby a question. Darby, how hard was it to get USD and OTIO built into your application at the same time?
It was actually surprisingly easy. And I say that as being a real newcomer to USD. So I think I did the initial implementation over a weekend. And most of that was just kind of learning how it worked. And by treating the USD as essentially an image sequence, everything just kind of fell into place and worked with all of the existing functionality as I showed off in the video. Building USD was a real pleasure. I was a little bit scared with all the dependencies, but the buildusd.py script works really well on macOS and Linux. And so, yeah, everything just kind of came together really quick, which was really exciting and a little bit scary as well, too, because I think there's still, as you were mentioning, huge amounts of different use cases we can explore with this, and really starting that discussion about how people envision using this or possible use cases is going to be really driving the development from here. And so, one of the things I'd be curious is that, is this sort of static viewing and playback of USD files useful? Do people want to be able to, 3D manipulate, like move the cameras, change render settings? There's a lot to talk about, so I'm really excited about it going forward. So 4 days total.
All right, excellent. That is much quicker than I would have expected. So congratulations on that.
Thanks. I mean, it was probably 12 months of contemplating and thinking about it, and then 4 days of actual hands on the keyboard.
Okay, great. Cool. Let's see. I think there's a couple of MovieLabs folks here. I'm curious if you had any sort of thoughts or questions for Ben for the sort of workflow use cases and things like that he showed there. Did any of that resonate with you guys, or I'm trying to provoke a question here, but but it's good to have you in the same room.
I think broadly we're very happy to see the OTIO work, and we see it having impact in a lot of different workflows. We tried it out in one very small one just to see how it would work. And I think, actually, Chris, maybe you can comment, but I think the OTIO part was probably the easiest part of the project. So it went very well, and I don't think we needed any extensions to it, unlike some of the other projects where we need to make a couple little source code changes. Chris, are you still on? Maybe he's there, but not there. Okay. Anyway, looking forward, and as I mentioned in chat, I mean, security was actually ended up being quite the bugaboo in the cloud, trying to authenticate every new network connection and check for authorizations is no easy matter. And so I think that's an area for future work by the ASWF, and we'll probably start some of that in hopefully this security working group once it gets approved.
I just want to jump in here and say, we've always seen OTIO as not just a timeline format, but more of a composition format, and as a way to carry a lot of this different type of metadata from sort of tracking IDs and that sort of thing, all the way into color and framing sort of information, and be the not necessarily the description of the schema for that metadata, but just a way to make sure that stays attached to the composition itself. And so seeing some of the stuff you all have been working on has been really great, because it shows us, it sets out more of a blueprint about how that data can actually be structured in OTIO and how it can be used more practically. So I'm really excited to see how that continues to develop and how people pick up that work and run with it.
And Jim, picking up on the OSVP stuff, there's a bunch there of really, there's a data flow there that's should be used downstream by a lot of these applications. Again, having OpenTimeline as the way of holding that frame related data is, I think, very interesting. And at the other end, IMF is one of the things that IMF doesn't do well, is have time dependent metadata for other applications. So I think they're right at the point of capture and at the point of distribution. There's applications for OpenTimeline outside of this just core interaction between VFX and editorial.
Yeah, and actually in the SMPTE RIS OSVP camera lens metadata work, I mean, originally when we were looking at just a kind of a common format to encode stuff, and we actually looked at OTIO, and I think we'd probably like to revisit it. We ended up doing something easier, we'll just make up our own JSON format and put it out in that. But again, I think, timelines are so important, all the way from, pre-production onset to VFX and post, that having something that can, serve, the support of timelines across all of those is immensely powerful. So thanks for all the great work.
Thanks, Jim. All right, well, we are over time. If anyone has follow-up questions, please find us on our GitHub discussion forum, our Slack channel. You can email us. Everything is all accessible at OpenTimelineIO. And thank you for the Academy Software Foundation for hosting us. And we will see you in the future. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily.